Hey there. Welcome to season 2 of AI Giants, a live podcast where we dive deep into the AI coding world with some of the most influential makers shaping the products we're using every day. I'm your host, Jam George. Welcome to everyone watching on YouTube, X, and LinkedIn. AI Giants is now available also as a podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Make sure to follow via the link below. Today, we're super happy to introduce Malte Ubl. Malte Ubl is the CTO of Vercel. Before Vercel, Malte spent 11 years at Google, where he rose from software engineer to principal engineer and engineering director. Outside of Google, he founded and curated JSConf, one of the most influential JavaScript conferences in the world. At Vercel, is now leading the push to make AI-powered development default. Welcome, Malte.
Thanks for having me. Super exciting.
Reminder, you can post questions in the QA section if you're following this on our website, or if you're commenting on YouTube, X, or LinkedIn. We have folks kind of gathering questions for us, so please engage. At the last 15 minutes, we'll get as many questions as we can. And we'll do that. So let's get started. Let's start with a very simple question. Vercel is really at the epicenter of AI with V0 and a number of key libraries. What has been most surprising to you, and how do you stay updated?
Yeah, I think Vercel has been going through the same transformation that we all have. I joined the company kind of coming from Google, kind of knowing a little bit what was on the horizon with AI, but it was before ChatGPT. And so we had to go through that transformation all together like everyone else. I feel that the company has gotten to a really good place with V0 being a tool that kind of UI forward, very makes a lot of sense for Vercel to do this, I feel, right? And the same with AI SDK, kind of having a framework in this space, again, makes a lot of sense to me. And so I feel as a company, we did the transformation decently well, can always be better. But that's the thing. I mean, how do I personally stay updated? I mean, I've been coding a lot lately. I've been always, and this is not a new thing, I've been paranoid about losing touch with reality of just being a suit. And so yeah, I've been just writing code, and I've been having AI write code for me as well, obviously.
Very cool. You are then one of the legends that are coming out and just kind of coding more and more and more and getting green bars in GitHub to produce more software with AI. So I want to talk about V0. I actually have a story, or a small story of a user, really. I started using V0 in November 2023. I was checking even the logs of me using the product, and it really felt like magic. I think as far as I see and know, it was the first real tool to generate UI. And so there's an argument to say that V0 kickstarted the prompt to product race. And so right now, many devs see AI coding assistants as helpers for tasks and boilerplate. Some obviously are building whole products and launching them, but we're still seeing that ramp of adoption. What is your vision for V0's capabilities, and what needs to happen to get devs truly confident in AI-generated code?
Yeah, I mean, for V0 specifically, I think the market is kind of differentiating a little bit, and there's products for different folks and different experience levels and different roles in the overall space. And obviously, you mentioned that story from late 2023, where this did seem like magic. And I mean, I remember actually sitting in the office and we were playing around with this because it was so obvious that ChatGPT was making text, websites are text, this should work, and then you tried it and it didn't work, right? It would make something really, really crappy. And the big idea that we're literally, someone was like, guys, I have it. It's like, wait, what do you have? It's like, I told it to use Tailwind, and it's great. and so it suddenly started working, right? And that's why we were able to ship this first. But then it's been a journey of product market fit, where there was a lot of interest initially, and there continues to be. But I think the market's been differentiating, and the two things that we are doing right now with V0 are really, I think, outside of the very developer-focused coding agents. So I tweeted a few weeks ago saying the main competitor of V0 is Microsoft Word, because you're really supposed to replace a document, right? You're writing this PRD or whatever you call it. It's this is what I want, and then you throw it over the fence to a developer, and they build something. They come back 6 weeks later and they're like, actually, you misunderstood me, right? So instead, you come with effectively the working app, and you move on from there, right? And so this is a use case that we see a lot. And so we see tech adjacent folks use V0, right? These are product managers, they're designers, they're product owners, whatever you want to call them, right? So that's one big deal. The other thing that we are heavily focused on is internal apps. So not aiming for like the super big production stuff, but saying you should be able to use V0 to go 0 to 1 on something that's truly like very valuable to you, right? But it might be a pretty small piece of software that helps your company like do a better job.
In an interview I read, and that you gave recently, you said that you pivoted V0's UX twice before shipping, and then twice after. That's so essentially 4 fundamental rethinks on how people interact with AI-generated code. What was the most painful pivot?
I think none of these pivots were painful, because there is like in traditional startup world, you have these pivots where like you're like few months in, you're like, damn, this is not working. We don't have product market fit. We need to do something else, right? We never pivoted V0 in that sense. We like in the very, very early days, everyone together was discovering what the right modality is. And I think we're actually more convinced now than even when we shipped, that actually conversational interaction is the way to go, right? I think initially people felt like a little bit dirty about it. Like, is it really just a chatbot with a bit of UI, right? And the answer is yes, right? So like you had to come to terms with that's the right modality. The other thing that there were but the real pivots came from the technical capabilities of the frontier models advancing, right? So before Sonnet 3.5, you couldn't really use these systems to make full stack apps. But then suddenly you could, right? And obviously that makes a huge difference. Like before that, it was essentially a very limited tool that you could use for prototyping or for making like specific React components, right? But like once you wanted to do something real, you had to kind of move off and go back to some traditional software engineering methods, right? And now it could connect to Postgres and I don't know, introduce cron jobs, whatever, right? Like all these things that you need in a full application became possible. And so you had to pivot the product because suddenly you could just do more, right? And so this is actually a very positive development. And we've been just recently seeing this again with Opus 4.5, where you have a similar magnitude step change of things that are possible now.
That makes sense. So 2 sentences where they are seemingly at conflict are true. One is that folks that were no longer writing code are now back to producing software. At the same time, we're seeing that many respected folks actually stopped writing and reading code. So do you think code is dead? And immediately follow up to that is Vercel building tools for developers who read code or developers who don't read code?
So I mean, I don't think code is dead at all. I think the big question, and I don't have an answer for you, right? But by the way, you have a very big cup, so good.
I do. I like
like,
I need my water.
The big question is like, sorry to be like too jargony, but like the elasticity of the software market is unknown. So the question is, if software cost goes down, what happens? Do we all just have less work, or do we make more software? And so we're in a big joint experiment figuring this out. I think what we see today, and like in Vercel's data, just for example, like how many new applications are being put on Vercel, is that the market is elastic, and so people make more software. And if anyone, like, if you work in startups or like in small companies where you're the developer, right, and you always made whatever you wanted, right? Like you might not be experienced this, but if you're in a real company, like where engineering is something you fight for, where you have to get in the roadmap, right, where you are waiting for your app to finally be developed 3 years after like you first requested it, right? Those companies can now make these apps 3 years earlier, right? And so there's so much more software to be written, and so like there will obviously be a point where this balances out, but for now what we're seeing is that we just seem like, yeah, I can generate code, but I can also I also need more code. And so I don't think it's that at all. And I mean, I personally feel really good about engineering right now. I think it's more fun than it used to be.
Yeah, I think that's a good quote. And as in terms of use case and UX, do you think is Vercel focusing more on that, on the developers that are not looking to read code or to actually interact with code, or to build a whole layer that is a great abstraction on top of code?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important to also separate V0's and Vercel's businesses, right? Like
Right.
We also run them very separately, right? I mentioned how V0 is very focused on this like broader set of folks interacting with code, while Vercel itself is a platform for developers and for running applications, right? And making the entire process towards that very, very seamless. So on the operations side, I think where we've now been talking about like the vision for Vercel to be self-driving software, and I think that's very aligned with like folks getting a little bit more removed from the software, right? So they also need a place where you can run it in a little bit more removed, right? But a little bit more self-driving, just like sitting in the back of a Waymo. But yeah, we've been just optimizing this entire end-to-end workflow, right? I think it's still important to have the right building blocks. We do think a lot about the LLM as kind of the writer of code. We think about what they need. We think about how to help them be better at their job. But ultimately, it is the same thing as it's always been.
Makes sense. So as we think about interaction usage of models, one thing that was very impressive was how Vercel hill climbed eval from Sonat's 4 baseline from 64% to 93%. So I got these data from some research we did. What is in that remaining 7%? So you're able to get apps to compile with no TypeScript errors. What do you think resides in that final 7%, that final frontier? Is that something fundamentally hard?
Yeah, I mean, also to match people's real experiences. I think people are actually not finding that they eventually have a lot of errors in their app, right? So it's important to understand the number from that eval. The eval is a one-shot eval. So what happens after one generation, right? Now, in what we do today, both V0, Cloud Code, Cursor, they all have the same architecture now, which is that there's an agentic loop where you build something, and then you, ideally, sometimes the agent will, not follow instructions, but it'll try to compile and say, oh my God, I made a mistake. Okay, I'm going to fix it. Now, so eventually the agent is able to figure out how to do this all the way, right? Now, does it matter whether the first generation is as perfect as possible? And the answer is yes. Why? Because the agentic loop is slow, right? I mean, it's gonna you have to run TypeScript. Even that might take a while on your project, right? Then you have to send the result to the model. The model might have to make more function tool calls to figure out the right source code to change. So this is all what's going to take let's say 20 seconds, right? Versus our post-processing model. So you have, let's say Opus does the initial code writing. Opus makes a mistake. We fix it inline as the Opus response comes back with an extremely cheap, extremely fast model. It essentially doesn't, you don't notice that acting at all. And so so you get essentially just removes one agentic loop instantiation from the process, right? And so that's super valuable, but eventually it's the same outcome, right? So that's important. And so I think we are just on a frontier exploration process right now where you can still, there's no 100% here, because we are constantly raising the bar of what we're doing, right? And so again, our work here, and this is actually the role we overall see ourselves playing, we just made V0 faster by removing agentic loop round trips from the process, but we are relying on the original frontier model for the actual intelligence and for the capabilities.
The developers deploy millions of projects to Vercel, and many of them already using V0, of course, which is an insane data set. So, spicy question time. Is V0 training on code deployed to Vercel? And if not now, will you?
So we're not training on code deployed to Vercel. Which that seems like a bad idea, right? So there's a separate thing of what happens with V0. Like if you're a V0 customer, right, you don't have to worry about this if you're a Vercel customer. If you're a V0 customer, you can opt into zero data retention, which is like the industry jargon term for no training, right? But I already mentioned that Vercel is not in the business of making new base models. We're in the business of making apps better, right? So, for example, this fixing model, right? The way this was trained, that's actually a reinforcement learning system, where what we actually did before is we built all these auto fixers. Some of them actually agentic, but like basically we trained a model on the manual fixing, right? But it doesn't actually need that many examples, and we had a lot of examples from the code we do, right? So this is like a much more like reduced level of training.
Yeah, I think that will be a lot of relief to hear that for millions of developers already relying on Vercel as a platform. As we, in one of our previous sessions we had with Dax, he told us that when you're building tools for developers at scale, you don't have to have opinions. You don't get to have opinions. You have to meet people where they are, and that's essentially their take. If we think about Next.js, it's famously opinionated. So how do you reconcile we know better as a posture with serve everyone? When has being opinionated backfired?
I think Dax, he's not completely wrong about this, but he definitely misses a very important and like dominating nuance, which is that it's like different types of software at different maturity cycles. So I personally have been making web frameworks since the late 90s, right? And I've been making it over and over again, right? And I've been learning from my mistakes. And then Guillermo has done the same thing, and everyone in the industry has done the same thing. That's why today, if you look at the popular frameworks, they're all pretty good. Why? Because they learned over time, right? And we understand extremely well what web applications are, incredibly well. There hasn't been anything particularly new in like a decade, right? Like it's like, so this is like we're just making it better to build the apps we understand really well. Now take the space of agent development. Mm-hmm. It couldn't be more different, right? Nobody knows how to build agents. Well, I mean, we've been getting better at it, right? Right? Like just in the last, I think, 3 months, there has been an industry-wide reckoning that it works super, super well to use coding agent architecture for non-coding tasks. Mm-hmm. Right? Imagine you had an opinionated agent framework that you built in the summer of 2025, and now you realize, damn,
it's all wrong.
It's all wrong. Right? Like this is not how you do this. And so like that's why if you look at the opinionation of AI SDK versus Next.js, they couldn't be further apart, right? Next.js says, okay, I know how to build a web application and I have a framework for you. AI SDK says, I don't know how to build an agent, but I do have a few examples for you how to do it. And I'm updating them as we collectively figure out how to do this. But I mostly give you functions, right? And you have to and you have to compose them together. And so like that's why I think like there is definitely this maturity cycle, and in as things mature, it pays to be more opinionated, but you have to be very, very humble in the early days and just kind of follow the flow.
Yeah, I think Dax would even appreciate that nuance. I think that's It's well said. Let's talk about moats. Vercel has built a reputation, exactly as you said, of exploration, of bleeding edge, of being at the forefront of these innovations, and AI is without a doubt a very good example of that. Last week, Guillermo and Vercel team introduced skills to the world, and so which is a very great example of this, right? So it's being completely attuned to what's happening right now. However, software is changing, right? Exactly how we're saying. And so how is Vercel adapting to a world where code is no longer protection, where as a company, we cannot stop, shipping and code is no longer any sort of moat?
I'm not sure code was ever a mode. By the way, we didn't introduce skills to the world. Anthropic did a while ago.
Fair enough. Yeah.
We again thought about like what should our role be, and it's like, how do you install a skill? And it's actually somewhat difficult, especially as a skill maker, right? You have to give people like 15 different instructions for every single coding agent, and so we felt there was a lot of value giving people a CLI that figures out, oh, you're using codex. Okay, I know how to do .codex / by the way, they're all the same, but open code is using singular. Fun fact. So it's using /skill as the directory structure. Anyway,
Yeah.
So that's why you need CLI, right? So you can just people like drop this command, it'll figure out how to do it for your particular situation, right? And I think it's good to add value like that, and like the mantra that I think brought to Vercel is that iteration velocity solves all known problems. In software engineering, sometimes also elsewhere, right? Like, so we try to move fast, and not just fast, but velocity is a vector, right? So like we also try to adjust direction at any moment, and that is both what I think we believe in for ourselves, and we want to give our customers the right, like the tools to kind of follow that same way of acting in the world, and software is in a way just a side effect of it.
As we think about web infrastructure and developer tooling, what do you think is criminally underappreciated right now? Something that people should be paying more attention to, but are not?
I think it's a good question. One thing that's really coming more to the forefront as something that's becoming more mainstream are durable compute and like workflow abstractions. So this has been around, I don't know, for 40 years. It's something that backend engineers would build, right? Initially, you would just hand roll it. You usually have a queue in there that you push work on, and then you have a bunch of workers doing the work. And like the whole goal is that this work has to be done, right? If there's an error doing the work, you have to try again, like this type of stuff, right? And then kind of, also like, over the last 20 years, startups like Temporal came onto the market saying, okay, like I have a better way of doing this that's not as kind of bare bones. But it stayed like in a way in a niche, and these things became somewhat like there's still a lot of boilerplate, a lot of like you have to be very deliberate about writing code the right way, right? And so people like what I see engineers do is, unless you're very much in a space where you have to be extremely reliable, people like wait for the first outage to put it in, right? Because it's like extra work. And now with AI agents, this becomes like, because we do more business automation, because we can automate more things, we need this type of backend code in more places. So there are lots of people working on this. We shipped a workflow dev kit late last year, where our idea was, okay, because this is now needed everywhere, what if we make the dumbest possible, most naive code also the robust one, right? Where you essentially just say, when you await a promise, that becomes a durable operation, where if that fails, it can be retried and so forth.
Very cool. One of the things that Vercel does is really it does sell the promise of shipping faster, because you just automate so many different things. You make so many different choices very easy. How do you actually know that your customers are more productive and not just feeling that they are? Is there any metric that you guys track that is important to get that not only feeling but actual productivity out of development?
Yeah, I mean, I'm both a big fan of measuring things, but I'm more of a fan of having metrics that you over time get the experience are correlating with like with increased performance. And so the one metric I want to mention that we like track super religiously is just the build time across our
Build
fleet,
time.
right? Because it's the most objective thing, and it's like if it's a very different life that you have if it's 30 seconds, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, or 30 minutes, right? Or even beyond, right? Like it's not just that you feel better about it, but your workflows change, right?
Right.
If it's 30 seconds, you're actually going to wait for the preview deployment, and you're going to send it to your colleague via Slack, right? And that's a faster process than saying, okay, I'm just going to move on to the next task and then remember coming back to it later.
No context switching, yeah.
Right. Like, so that's why we care about so much. And then like across our customer base, what we also want to see is that they make more builds. Because again, does it mean that any given person making another build is that better or worse? No, like it doesn't mean nothing, right? But like if you have 100,000 customers, and you see them, okay, they're now pushing more, then you see that there is a change to overall behavior, which we consider good, right? And that's what we're after.
Makes sense. I want to switch tracks to talk a little bit about React. So the app router and React server components were massive changes. Some developers absolutely love the new capabilities. Others have found it to be a bit over-engineered. Do you feel the rollout was premature? Are there lessons that Vercel learned from the difficulties that people had with server components?
So definitely lots of lesson learned. I think what the team did super well is that they made it incremental adoption, right? So Pages router, which doesn't use RSC, is still maintained. I think it's been 4 years, something like that, right? Like it's been quite a while. So and so you can, in your app, do it route by route. I think I think in terms of lesson learned, the main lesson that was, I think, one in communication, I think it's still ongoing, right? Like there was a time when people were like felt bad about putting use client into their components. It's like, why?
Yeah.
Like go, like if you like, it's actually required, right? Like if you want to make the thing interactive, you have to put it in, it's fine, right? I tell people, okay, if you want to migrate and you like Pages router, you can just put a function into your server component called get service at props and call it at the top of your page. And you have essentially the same framework as before, right? But you now have layouts and like all the goodies that people like the team put into app router, but you don't have to like embrace RC as a philosophy, right? And I think we like, we're actually seeing a lot of adoption of this type, and I think it's amazing, right? It's very similar, like I think where lessons learned were like app router actually still doesn't answer everything that you want to do in an application lifecycle, right? And so developers need to understand that like in reality, you are going to use React Query in your app router app, right? Because app router doesn't give you another way of like real-time updating data, and that's cool, right? And I think the like in the framing in the on X, if you follow that too much, right? It's like people are talking about this as like super competitive and like whatever, right? And you have to make these choices, and you have to migrate away from your past things. And I think that's just almost always wrong, right? You can almost always use these things together, and you almost never need to migrate away from code you wrote in the past. I'd rather have people invest in making new things that are fun.
Yeah, it's a good heuristic to optimize for. On React, folks have mentioned there's been some talk of Vercel being too close to React core, essentially, putting some weight or influencing how React got all in on server components. How do you respond to those concerns? Were there any points where you worried about the React plus Next roadmap diverging from what developers in the trenches wanted or wished for?
By the way, I feel like I don't, Vercel is the second major contributor to React. That must be better than having a single one, right? A single one that doesn't really, and I don't want to be too spicy, but does Meta care about React? It's one of the largest open source project in history, right? If you've ever heard a podcast with Mark Zuckerberg, and I've heard this actually a lot, where people ask him, like, what are Meta's open source contributions that you're proud of? Have you ever heard him say React? No. He says Llama, right?
It's been changing.
He actually has cool stuff out of his head that I've never heard of, like some random Kubernetes competitor or whatever, right? Like I'm sure they've done great things, right? He never thinks about React. He apparently doesn't care, right? And obviously now React is in the process of being gifted to a foundation. And so I think it's actually extremely important that there's at least two companies that invest, right? And so that's one thing. I think the React server components was something that came out of Meta. We picked it up. We were like, Next wasn't the first project picking it up. Shopify had a thing that they tried. They were definitely too early. So he asked if I thought it was too early. Probably not, right? Because also we actually benefited a lot from Shopify, a little bit falling on their face of adopting too early, right? And so I think, yeah, but that's the way things sometimes go. So yeah, no, I feel there should be more contributors to React. There should be more companies, putting their money where their mouth is, and it should be a good collaboration, right? One thing that I think Meta got really, really right is, and this is something, by the way, I've experienced myself working internally at Google, making internal frameworks, like React ultimately is to Meta, right? Where you have these customers that you can iterate with on a really agile fashion, because you're all in the same monorepo, you're pushing together, you can fix them if they have a mistake and so forth, right? And I think it's absolutely brilliant and not well explained enough how React switched to this canary release model.
Mm-hmm.
Just like use client, it's not the greatest name anyone ever came up with, but what it really means is that I have these framework customers, and Next.js is only one of them, right? Who have very close collaboration with the React team, and when React wants to make a breaking change, this is actually extremely easy for, like, say, Next.js or Tanstack to accommodate. You just do it, right? In the next release, you just make the breaking change, as long as it's the framework layer, right? If React wants to do a breaking change to the world, that is a thing that they can only do every so few years, right?
Every so often, yeah.
But how do you know that your thing is good if you've never tried it? And so the fact that React can now treat Next.js and Remix like an internal customer at Meta is actually a huge innovation in how to build large-scale open source projects, and make it so that when React 19 comes out, it's been in use in major frameworks for literally years now, right? And so you're so confident now that this is actually something we can give to 5 million developers who are going to directly depend on it, right? And so I feel like there has been I just really want to give credit to the Meta team about how good this is now, and how good this collaboration is, and how much faster it'll allow us to move as a overall community.
We're almost in the Q&A section, so please do, if you're watching, please do post any questions that you might have for Malte. So Before we go to that section, there's a few more questions I wanted to ask you about market and future. How do you think about the role of software developer, software engineering as a profession? I mean, we touched on this before. Obviously, you mentioned the elasticity of software as just being consumed by the world, and there's more need for software, which obviously I understand. But there's been talk of the junior career, especially as in a previous session, being closing. It's so much harder for juniors to get roles nowadays. What do you think of this? What do you make of this?
Yeah, I don't want to dismiss it, but I think the person who needs to be worried about is someone who's 5+ years into their job and set in their ways. The example I like giving is, am I good at TikTok? No, I'm not good at making TikTok
Yeah.
videos. Is the 18-year-old good at making TikTok videos? Yes, they grew up with it, like they're right. And so similarly, we now have an upcoming generation of developers who are grown in AI, right? And so as our profession changes, they're going to be better at this. And so yeah, I mean, if I'm set in my ways, I have to adopt, right? Like there's no way around this right now. But yeah, we'll have the AI native developers, and they're not, like very clearly, like we have a big internship program at Vercel, and they're amazing, right? Like they're great, and they give devs who work here full time a run for their money, and so like just very, very clearly, Vercel is not going to stop hiring at junior levels at all. Like it was zero plans. But we do have expectations about AI proficiency and so forth, right? And so they apply across all seniority levels.
So it's the senior developer that is at risk if they don't adapt to this new world.
Yeah, I think like that's both not new, right? Like that was always the things were always changing, but there has been like a bigger like one-time change, right? I think people have to adopt, and I think I think the new generation is going to have an easier time doing this, and they're gonna as we are gonna see the the people who come out of college now, they're still like mid disruption, right? In a couple of years, we're going to have people who've never learned a different way, right? One thing that we are seeing is that we have the strongest AI adoption at the most senior levels, like of active engineering, right? So the principal engineers are the ones who benefit the most, and I think there's a good intuition for why, because they've been reviewing so much code, and that's more of their job now than it used to be. But they're benefiting from it a lot, right? And so our roles transform a little bit into to be more management like, and that is going to be something that some people are really good at, and some people are not so good at, right? And as you come out of your college or however you kind of learn to be a software developer, there's going to be more of a filter, right? Where people who tend to be good at this, right, are going to actually complete their studies, and I think are going to be extremely good at adapting to this world.
Very nuanced answer. Thank you. As we think about programming languages, do you think how do you see AI changing programming language adoption the next 5 years? Like obviously, as we think about TypeScript, JavaScript, Python, seem to be the preferences of the world. What do you think will happen to just adoption in general of programming languages?
Yeah, I think everything, like there is a balanced shift. I mean, obviously TypeScript was already super successful before this moment, but I already talked about how agentic loops are a thing, and how like figuring out things are wrong automatically is helpful. And so that's why like the trade-offs are changing, where previously I needed to consider, okay, I'm adding types, it's going to make it a little bit more difficult to write. Sometimes I'm running into rabbit holes, but now you get the benefit of better code generation, right? And so I think there's going to be kind of there's going to be just deeper typing in languages, and also I think innovation in any form of programmatic validation of correctness. And I don't mean this because that's never going to happen in the like mathematical proof sense, but I do mean it in the sense of having more expressive type systems, of having like maybe new types of testing and stuff like that.
Cool. And as we think about open source, we now get to use agents that can write all these thousands of lines of code for us. And the open source model or projects seem to be changing a bit. For example, we've seen Tailwind publicly acknowledge how AI is changing their business model. So in a world where we can create all the software with just a few words, what is the place for open source?
Yeah, I mean, I already mentioned Tailwind as kind of the enabler in a way of this modern revolution, right? And I didn't actually say why, but like I think it's kind of obvious, right? Like you have this inline thing that the model doesn't have to reason as far about. Like that's why models love Tailwind, right? But the debate of sustainable open source is not a new one, right? Like at all. Actually, I think we've made some progress, but it's still not good, and it was never like I think it's an area of innovation. So I think Tailwind as like selling a paid version of your product, I think that's I actually think there is a way to adopt to this world, right? Like you mentioned that we have been pushing out knowledge around skills. You could imagine that I have a paid skill that goes with my open source library, right? As a model of monetizing. I feel we continue to see we'll have to see how the SaaS business models over time develop. I don't think we have time to go too much into this. I do want to maybe plug Vercel's model of open source monetization, because I think we ourselves innovated a little bit on this, right? Where our open source, like there's this notion of open core, right? Open core means that you have something that's open source as in AGPL or similar licenses where everyone can run it themselves, but nobody can make a business out of running it, right? So that's the most prevalent way of monetizing open source. We don't utilize this model at all. And we instead say, okay, there's Next.js and all our other projects, which are completely unencumbered. And like, we love it if people make services of selling Next.js hosting, right? But we do sell we obviously sell adjacent services. And for us, we've essentially discovered that it's better to grow the pie than to say all of the pie is ours. We can be the only company doing this, right? And because that limits the size, right? And so we're all about growing the pie. I think this should be a model that's covered, like should be copied more of attempting to open source monetization, where like you're both very liberally licensed and you allow competition and the market to improve, but you then benefit from the overall kind of momentum of your framework.
Brilliant. So now let's open up for questions. Please do feel free to ask any questions from Malte. The first question that I have here asked on YouTube: what do you see long-term AI going? I'm worried the costs will skyrocket to justify investments over time. Do you plan on keeping V0 affordable for every dev going into the future, or focus on big business?
I don't think that AI cost is going to skyrocket in the long term. I think like just because of this is computers doing this work. They we as a species are extremely good at making computers better. We are, I think, I mean, I think it's interesting that with like inference time intelligence, we have done like a jump where like, okay, inference cost went up. I think it's more likely that in the future we will find algorithm improvements that are additional to hardware improvements are gonna make inference more efficient. So I think I just wouldn't be too worried about cost structure in relative to value. I think it's already pretty good, to be honest. Like if I compare like how much time it saves me, I think I'm getting a good value at this time, and I think that that the value is going to improve. I think one major point I should be making as well to just back this up, right? So if Anthropic runs away with the price, right, then yes, maybe they can just charge monopoly tariffs, right? But that's not what's happening, right? Like we're in a head-to-head race of all the major AI labs. And so what that means for us is that not only do we get the innovation as customers of them, but we also get the market dynamics leading to costs going down, right? Because you can, okay, like, sure, maybe Opus is the best model right now, but Gemini is going to catch up, OpenAI is going to catch up, and like I think if you look at nuanced people, they're already maybe caught up, right? So like I can switch over, and so I like if the current market dynamics hold, I expect prices to be pretty reasonable.
So competition and capacity building will keep prices where they are, or at least not tenfold them over time.
Right.
Another question that we have here, I think is the last one that we have, is, with AI coders becoming increasingly skilled, do you think the so-called human touch will influence how customers and sellers perceive products? Should we even consider introducing a dedicated AI tag, like HTML or Next.js tags for websites and apps to make content easier to crawl and life simpler overall?
So I think the human touch is extremely important, and you now have more time to do it because you don't spend your time doing the boring stuff, right? So I think like there's going to be a movement towards stuff that feels genuine, that feels like there's craft, because we're kind of like, as humans, we're longing for that, right? And so I think there's going to be a lot of that, and we'll, I think there was the second part of the question that's kind of the most like, how do I make this stuff be better for AI? Which I think that's really important, but I think it follows kind of traditional kind of SEO style best practices. I also think that I think one of the next revolutions that we'll see is that we already have models that are like decent at web surfing, and I think they'll get really good. And I don't think we'll have to do too much to like make our apps better. Beyond essentially accessibility best practices are going to be continue to be kind of important because of humans, and they also really help the agents navigate your apps.
Brilliant. Well, with this, we end our show, and so I am so thankful for Malte to have joined us today. Your conversation and the answers to the questions were both nuanced and candid, which is a very rare combination. So I'm really thankful for you to be here. Yeah, that's it for today. Thank you, Malte, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was fun. Great questions.
Very cool. Today we looked behind the story of V0 and got some brilliant details from Vercel. Learned a ton from this conversation, and I hope you had as much fun as I had in the session. As always, we at Codacy build security end-to-end products with AI-generated code. And for our next AI Giants on Feb 5, we'll also be sitting down with Dana Lawson, wonderful person, CTO of Netlify. Make sure to save the date below, and we'll see you there. And that's that. Thank you, everyone, for joining.